Hi, everybody. I'm so happy to have one of my favorite guests here with us. Last minute, actually, I called her last night or texted her and I said, is there any chance you'd come on last minute and talk about the Britney Spears thing? Because it's so fascinating. I know people are going to be talking about it, but I don't really know anything about it. And so she agreed to. So this is Andrea Burkhart. Thank you, Andrea, for being with us.
Oh, thanks for having me, as always.
And Andrea is a criminal defense attorney and does appellate law. And you can find other interviews with her on my channel. One thing, too, that's interesting here for our audience to understand is that your husband, for a while, he did guardianship work. And was he a lawyer, or how was that? What was that?
Yeah, so he's a lawyer. He's not working as a lawyer now. He's doing guardian ad litem work. And what that means is that he's basically the investigator for the court.
So, Andrea, could you just give me your general take on the situation? And let me ask you to start off with, are you sympathetic to what Britney Spears is saying?
Yeah, so I'm hugely sympathetic to what Britney is saying, and these are heartbreaking cases a lot of the time. Conservatorship is basically a situation where there's been a formal determination has been made that for whatever reason, she's incapable of managing her own, not only her own financial affairs, but her own personal health and safety and well-being. And so based on that, her father has primarily been the one that's been appointed to take care of the things for her. And so that comes with kind of a corresponding massive loss of rights on her part. Entry of a conservatorship in California is essentially deeming somebody to not have legal capacity to enter into their own contracts, to make those types of decisions, to make her own healthcare decisions. So it's a very, very serious deprivation of rights that happens when a guardianship is put into place. So the challenge that I think we have with Britney's situation, which I've been following for a long time, I remember back when she did the head shaving and, all that stuff. Britney was obviously having a lot of troubles, and there was the whole situation that triggered the guardianship, as far as I remember, which was her involvement with this kind of creepy dude, Sam Lufty. And I don't know that we know much about him. He seems to be one of these people that, who else is he like?
Well, he's one of these. Yeah, he's one of these sleazy. So I remember this period too that you're talking about, and I'm glad. I know that my audience is gonna be like, "Don't interrupt her," but I just want to say one thing. I'm glad you brought up the head shaving incident and the Sam Lifty thing, because a number of the younger viewers do not remember how Britney Spears was deeply troubled during this period. And so I just want to say that this conservatorship, whether it's right or wrong or whatever, it didn't come out of nowhere. And if you don't remember, if you weren't paying attention, you weren't around really in those years when Britney was deeply troubled. I mean, she really was close, I think, to dying or killing herself or something crazy happening. Right. So anyway.
Part of the concern too at that time had to do with her children, because she was doing very irresponsible things with her children in the car, was the big thing. And that's kind of why driving has, for sort of a long time been an issue for Britney. She was like driving around with her toddler child in her lap with no seatbelt, and stuff like that. And so, just things that were troubling. Now, part of the problem that we have, though, is that conservatorships, because they typically involve, medical information and, highly personal, confidential stuff, they are confidential files. So we don't have a whole lot of information about the guardianship, the basis for it. We don't know what, if any, medical diagnosis Britney has. All we basically know are sort of the bits and pieces that have, leaked out one way or another. So it's a very incomplete picture. And that makes it, for me personally, really hard to, come down on one side or the other real firmly, like, yes, this conservatorship needs to be in place. No, this conservatorship doesn't need to be in place. There's just a whole ton of information that we don't have available.
Thanks. And I think that's a really good point there. And I kind of wanted to actually play devil's advocate, not toward you so much, but devil's advocate toward some of the Britney defenders, because I think, okay, so I think the obvious position here, sort of the obvious feeling, would be to look at the situation and say, well, this woman is, how old is she? She's 40 or whatever. And she's got, and it's been years now since this original decision. And she can do all of this touring. And look, she's able to stand up in court and speak, fairly semi-eloquently and so forth. Of course, she needs to have control of her life. Now, of course, she should be able to determine if she has an IUD, birth control device in her body or whatever. That is the obvious sort of knee-jerk reaction. What I would be interested to talk about is what would the legitimate reasons be why she would still need to be in this from a legal perspective? Like, what could be going on with her? You know what I'm saying?
Sure. Well, so these types of situations, they're not that uncommon. It is fairly uncommon to be dealing with a conservatorship of somebody as young as Britney. Usually when that's the case, it's because you're talking about somebody who has some kind of permanent, a traumatic brain injury or a developmental disability, something like that is going to have, it's incurable, it's long lasting, and it's always going to affect their capacity to function well. That clearly isn't Britney. Whatever issues she has, she doesn't seem to have, major cognitive deficits. She is obviously very capable of, taking care of her work, showing up when she needs to, staying in shape, doing the choreography, all of that kind of thing. But we really don't know, is that just because she's being well managed? Is that because her medication is under control? Is that because, whatever environmental situation was going on at the time when she had her breakdown has now been resolved? We just don't know. And so I'll tell you from my perspective personally, what jumps out as a red flag to me from Britney's statement yesterday was her insistence that the conservatorship be terminated without an evaluation. And she said that repeatedly. Pretty much every single time she said she wanted the conservatorship terminated, she said she wanted that without an evaluation. And so basically what that means is that Britney is saying, regardless of whatever the medical situations were in the past, you should not take account of those my medical situation right now in deciding whether this conservatorship is appropriate. And that's a big red flag to me, because number one, the judge is never going to do that. The judge is never going to make a decision about her capacity when her rights were taken away, presumably because of some type of medical diagnosis. They're not going to ignore that and cut her loose. But it's also a red flag to me, just because you can sort of read between the lines a little bit with what she said, that, her evaluations have not necessarily been positive to her. There was a sort of suggestion that there might have been some kind of substance or alcohol, a need to go to rehab. That was not really entirely clear. It sounds from what she said like her medication is monitored very, very closely. She's contributing, I think she said 8 vials of blood a week. I mean, that's a lot. That is a lot of blood monitoring. And we don't know why. I mean, yes, it's possible that she's correct and she is just being, sort of abused and tormented. But it's also possible that she's not very compliant with her medication routine. And so, this monitoring is put into place so that they can literally check and make sure, the drugs are getting into her blood. So that concerns me. And part of the problem with, the hashtag Free Britney and the kind of publicizing of her situation is that we shouldn't know. We shouldn't have to know. We're not supposed to know. These are deeply personal things. And she talks about, the conservatorship and stuff is embarrassing for her. I mean, imagining how much more embarrassing it would be to have, all of the gory details of her diagnoses and her treatment and the problems that she's had and all of that being out in the press. That would be horrifying. but that's precisely the information that the judge, is really going to need and to rely on to be able to evaluate, is she actually capable of looking out for her own best interests?
Well, and thank you. All of that is it's really smart analysis. And I just think that, look, I mean, I have in my family had periods of mental illness, in some cases resulting in hospitalization for a while, a couple of members of my family. And the thing about oftentimes when people are psychologically ill, they don't want to face that. They can be deeply in denial about that. They can be unaware of it. But part of being mentally sick is like, you're impaired, right? And it's a cliche in psychiatry. I have a good friend who's a psychiatrist, but it is a cliche, but it's true that that many people who, including those who are the most mentally ill, are also the most resistant to complying with medication, with therapy, and so forth. Now, Britney, some of the things that she said, I know from my own experience with family members, she's right. Like lithium, you put somebody on lithium, that is a hardcore drug. In some ways, that's more damaging to the body than putting someone on heroin or something. You can have long-term kidney damage from lithium. It does make someone, especially initially, completely drunk out of it and whatever. So my point being that there's a lot of problems with modern psychiatry, and I'm sure that Britney at times has not been treated optimally. I just wonder, though, and she gives this really impassioned statement in court, and I like I said, my knee-jerk initial reaction is to be really sympathetic, but I just wonder, are we getting an accurate perception from her? Or if we talked to her parents, if we talked to her, her staff or whatever, would we get something else?
Yeah. And that's one of the things that does make this situation and situations like it so heartbreaking, is because it often is, it's like a feature of the mental illness. Like you said, that you don't recognize it, or that it's, one of the common things that I would encounter often with people who have delusional, types of problems, schizophrenia or, severely bipolar, things like that. Particularly people who have these kind of persecutory, paranoid types of thought processes, is that often that centers around on their medication and their care providers. Mm-hmm. Because that's who's around, that's what's available. That's kind of what's going on with your life. And so,
those are the people who are enforcing the things that you generally don't like and don't want, like a parental figure.
Sure. And so it can be really hard to tease that out. And at the same time, like you said, I have a ton of sympathy for, people who don't want to take mental health medications, because a lot of those medications have, just very severe effects.
Absolutely.
Not just on, your mood and your energy and stuff like that, but just your whole outlook. Like, to me, I almost see it in almost like a spiritual kind of way.
I wanted to ask, thank you. That's really interesting. I wanted to ask you, I guess one thing that I'm curious about, there are so many crazy people who have money. Okay. I mean, you can look at biographies of all kinds of people, and crazy people who don't have money as well. But I'm just saying, like, I don't understand the idea that Britney Spears cannot be in control of her money and her life, merely because, she might have significant mental emotional issues, because there's so many other people we know, actors, actresses, whatever, and they have access to their money. So what makes her different from someone like Charlie Sheen or whatever? I know he's calmed down recently.
Great question.
Lohan, what makes her different from these, or Armie Hammer? What makes her different from these people who are making reckless and destructive choices with their money? Do you have any idea?
I don't. And that's again, one of those situations where we don't know if it's because of information that we don't have, that isn't public, or if it's just circumstantial. I did come across something recently that indicated that Sam Lufty Also had some kind of connection with Amanda Bynes and had an involvement with her family.
He's just a predator, basically, Sam.
Well, he's not only just a predator, but he's got this weird intersection with families that end up getting guardianship over their, famous actor children. And so, we don't know. Is that part of the nexus here? It's just very difficult to say.
This guy is such a horrible guy that after these women date him, the parents are like, oh my God, we've got to get conservatorship.
Basically.
Well, Amanda Bynes is another example of someone who, she wasn't at Britney Spears' level of stardom, but she was semi-famous and had a lot of success early, and really had significant problems. Misha Barton also had a period, did she not? She lost. I think
she was involuntarily committed at some point. She definitely had some issues. So, like I said, it's hard to say in a specific case because our information is so limited. I can say from just the information that we have from what Britney has given us and how she presented, it seems likely to me that she probably does have some kind of manic disorder. I don't think you're typically getting lithium for, other reasons. I'm not
a mood disorder.
So I don't know, but I believe that lithium is usually a pretty good indicator of mania. And so mania can also be really debilitating. It's,
people think that, people are going to hate me interrupting you again.
No, please do.
But having had, and you may have as well, having had some experience with this, my personal life, like people who don't understand this, they think that mania means that a person's really happy. But in fact, mania, it's when the person is really, their emotions are really out of control, and they'll speak really fast. And often they engage in behaviors that in their sober life, they would find appalling and stuff like that. So anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. And there's a lot of sort of cycling, that happens because it's like you said, it can feel good. I think a lot of times people are manic. Yes, they feel great because you feel like you have so much energy and you feel like you're creative and your mind is doing these things. But at the same time, you're not sleeping, you're not eating, you're not taking care of yourself. And that's going to have, effects on how you think and how you feel and so forth. And ultimately in the case of bipolar, there's usually some kind of terrible crash. So yeah, it can be really debilitating and particularly if it's to the point where it does become delusional, where people start having literal problems with perceiving, with hallucinations, stuff like that. Really common symptom of mania that I'm not accusing Britney of by any means, but is a reason to be concerned, is hypersexuality. And I don't just mean like want to get it on, like this can manifest as like severe, like think about the cats. Self-destructive behavior. Very self-destructive. And the reason why I bring that up in Britney's case, one is because of the whole situation with the IUD, which I know is, and I mean, it's horrifying, right? It seems absolutely horrifying that a person can't make their own reproductive choices, that you literally, have to be subjected to something like that you don't want. And it's important for people to know that that's guardianship in a nutshell right there. There's a provision there's a whole chapter in the California probate code dealing with conservatorship. You can petition to have a person who's under a conservatorship sterilized, totally allowed. And that goes back to, some Supreme Court decisions from like back in the 1930s when, it was just sort of common knowledge that if you were a quote unquote defective, that it was going to be in the public, for the public benefit to just sterilize you. What we do know from Britney's history is she does have, a little bit of a kind of off relationship with men. And, she had the first like sort of completely impulsive marriage that was annulled, 2 or 3 days later, the Vegas marriage. Okay. I mean, you can maybe pass it off as, yeah, you're in your 20s and things happen and it was just weird. But it's just something to kind of take note of, that most people don't do that. Britney did that. It's a little bit odd. You know, her relationship with Kevin Federline, you know,
K-Fed.
K-Fed. I mean, I can't give K-Fed too much heat because he's literally from like right down the street from me.
Oh, he is.
He's
Well,
a local boy from here. Yeah, old K-Fed from Pendleton, Oregon.
K-Fed. I had a boyfriend years ago who was really into music, and but as a joke, he gave me, that was back when people had CDs. So he gave me a K-Fed CD, Kevin Federline's debut, his debut album, and I found it the other day. I was going through anyway, but yeah, but what you're saying is, like, if we look at her romantic history, particularly during the period leading up to the conservatorship being put into place, and I mean, really reckless choices and people taking advantage of her and so forth. And I know that some in the audience would say, well, okay, maybe a lot of people under those terms would be put under conservatorships then, right? Because I know a lot of people making reckless decisions. What is the difference there? Or what would you say about that?
Well, usually it's going to come down to some type of diagnosis. You know, if you're just making, and I mean, that's like the $1 million question, right? You know, how do you tell the difference between somebody who is deliberately choosing to self-destruct and somebody who is self-destructing for reasons beyond their control? You know, how do you answer that? And so the answer is typically, well, the judge looks at the medical information, looks at the, you know, totality of the circumstances and tries to figure out what's going on with this person. And so we talked briefly about Sam Lufty, you know, and him coming into the scene shortly before the whole conservatorship process was started with Britney. And that also, you know, it's a situation where we kind of know some stuff. We don't necessarily know a lot. But the picture that we've been given does seem to be, you know, one, exploitative. You know, this was a guy who was there to get what he could get out of Britney, did not have her best interests in mind. But also the triangulation, you see, you know, that he would set her up against her family and her parents and so forth, try to isolate her, you know, maintain his influence and stuff. And so I kind of presume, although we don't know, and really everything we're saying is mostly speculation, but I sort of presume that there was a conclusion by the court that for one reason or another, she is just particularly susceptible to being victimized by people like that. And I'll put out there that another red flag that I see that I am concerned about is the current boyfriend, Sam Asghari, is now hashtagging. This is a problem.
I don't think he's a good guy. Sorry. I don't think she's making a good choice there either. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, and so that kind of gets at the core of how these things can be so problematic, because yeah, to me, that's a massive red flag. Honestly, the whole ginning up of the public controversy about all of this is a big red flag to me as well. You know, this is not in Britney's interest for all of this to be smeared out there and for people to be speculating about her and stuff. She's right. Already said how embarrassing she finds the whole thing. She cried over the documentary. You know, this is her life. And I just question, you know, it's not that people can't be, you know, hashtag free Britney and also legitimately interested in her well-being. I think most people that are hashtagging free Britney really are deeply concerned about her well-being. But there is also a concern that, you know, that comes into conflict with whoever is benefiting from creating this whole, you know, publicity thing at her expense. So the fact that Sam is, apparently participating in that,
He's
that
playing
really
it up a lot
does,
and
that
calling
does,
her dad an asshole, publicly and stuff, which that may be his opinion, especially if he's really supportive of Britney, but it just seems like
exactly.
a bad vibe from him.
Well, and the thing is that, I've given Sam, I feel like I've given Sam the benefit of the doubt for quite some time. Brittany can, she can like what she like, and she can make big girl choices about her relationships and stuff. But it just, to me, is a, if nothing else, it's some really bad judgment that if you really are, in Brittany's camp, interested in her self-interest, it just seems like really bad judgment to me to be now getting on the publicity train.
Yeah, and I wanted to briefly say something about the IUD, the birth control issue, because we mentioned that earlier. I realized that I realize there's a whole question there of women's autonomy and reproductive freedom and bodily freedom and all of that. And I'm really sympathetic to that argument. Personally, I'm pro-choice, although it's not something I talk about on my channel. But so I am sympathetic to all of that. However, I do take issue with the notion that someone is entitled to have children. That is some kind of basic right or freedom. I understand that's how people view it, but look, if you are in a psychologically problematic condition to the point where you have had to be institutionalized in the past, and to the point where apparently things are still not going well in her current treatment, or they're not going optimally, as we talked about earlier, maybe you don't need to have children. And I know people say, well, she's already had two and she can have all the help that she needs in terms of nannies or whatever. Well, okay, but look, she just doesn't seem like this is maybe a good situation for another kid to be born into. Mm-hmm. And so, I don't know the situation. And like I said, I am sympathetic to the idea that a person should have control over their own body and should not have things implanted in them they don't want or whatever. But I really do hate this idea in society that everybody's just entitled to have a child. Yes, biologically, most people are able to have one, but I really think that people should be a lot more careful, and a lot of people having children who don't have any business having children. So I don't know. That's my thought, but anything to add to that? But
yeah, well, I get it, and I mean, that's just sort of one of the basic struggles we have as a civilization is the conflict between your rights and interests as an individual and the rights and the interests of the society as a whole.
And other people. Yeah.
Yeah. And other people. And so if other people are going to end up bearing the burden of your traumatized children, that you weren't capable of raising, well.
Or if your child bears that burden, right, of having been born to someone who's crazy.
I mean, that has societal implications. You can't say society has no interest in that, and everybody is going to come down in a different place with where they draw that line. I tend to be a very small L libertarian mindset. I mean, I'm a criminal defense lawyer. My whole thing is about getting people out of cages. So I tend to be very, very suspicious of the government, telling you you have to have an IUD, you can't have children, you must take lithium, things like that. I mean, that's definitely where my sympathies are.
Agreed. Me too. Yeah.
But it's just tough, and this is the kind of situation that really brings my ambivalence to the fore.
Right. Right. Well, let me ask you this. What do you think should happen here? I know that, and I don't, you don't know all the details or whatever, but just your gut instinct.
Yeah. My gut instinct is she needs to be evaluated. I think she has every right, and she should have the right to be able to petition to eliminate the guardianship or the conservatorship. If her condition is better, if she's stabilized, if she's got more protections in place where she doesn't need that type of restriction on her own liberty to make sure that she's safe and taken care of. But there's just no way that decision can be made, with a vacuum when it comes to her, potential psychological issues. That has to be a consideration. And I want it to be clear again, I'm not saying that people who have mental illnesses, are defective or are unable to take care of themselves, or, can't live very full and fulfilling lives. But there comes a point where a mental illness, it's more than a challenge that has to be managed. It reaches a point where it really does become very debilitating, and just leaves you prone to being victimized. People with mental illness are, extremely susceptible to crime. They're, most of our crime victims, and just
they're vulnerable. It sounds like you're saying,
yes,
because especially like wealthy people who also have mental, psychological instability, and they're vulnerable. Like, and we were talking about like Sam Lufty and this new guy who seems shady, and Kevin Federline and different people. And so, it seems like one of the big concerns here is again, she would make herself, through mental instability, vulnerable. She'd be vulnerable to these people who would just take her money. Right. And
exactly. And so you not only have a target on her because of all her money, but then she's in Hollywood. Like, this is a place that's notorious for predatory, narcissistic, nasty people who will suck you dry and move on and have no, second thoughts or compunctions about it. So if Britney is not herself a particularly ruthless and, self-confident, high self-esteem type of individual who is able to draw and enforce her own boundaries, then yeah, that's not a good environment for her to be in. She's a little guppy in a tank full of cichlids. I don't know if anybody are fish people, but
I don't, but I still sound good.
And again, I don't know Britney. We're operating in such a void that it's so hard to make judgments about it. But my impression of Britney has certainly always been that she is an emotional person. She's a sensitive person. She's soft. She doesn't seem, she's obviously very conscientious and driven and ambitious. But you can hurt Britney, and I think Britney has been very, very hurt, and very publicly. And I just have so much empathy for her and the lifestyle that she led and the kind of challenges that is posed for her. And so those are things that kind of have to be borne in mind as well. It's one thing when you're just sort of Joe Schmo nobody, who has a regular 9-to-5 job and a normal amount of resources or whatever. Yeah, you might attract some predators, but it's not like they're going to be swarming to you. Britney is she's a whole other situation. She is just a honeypot waiting to be exploited.
Well, I appreciate your analysis about all of that. I think it's really interesting and nuanced take, and so thanks for that. I did want to, while I've got you here, I got you hostage here. Now, I did want to say, is there anything that's happened, and maybe nothing, and then I can cut this, that's fine, but is there anything that's happened recently with the Johnny Depp, Amber Heard situation that you want to comment on, since we talked?
Yeah. So I don't think there's anything really like exciting right now. There's more discovery disputes. It just seems to be kind of an ongoing thing. The big thing that's happening is the briefing over Amber Heard's, fourth something attempt to get the lawsuit dismissed. She's arguing that the UK judgment should preclude there being a trial on whether Johnny Depp is a wife beater in the United States. Unfortunately, she seems to have overlooked that there are, literal actual legal requirements to be able to do that she can't meet. So she was previously warned by the judge that going down this avenue would probably be futile, and that if the court felt it was a waste of time, there would more than likely be consequences for that. So at this point, we're just waiting. She's filed her brief. It's thoroughly unimpressive. We're waiting for Ben Shu to respond, and Ben Shu's response should be epic. I'm really looking forward to it. Ben is a great writer, and he is going to stick the shiv in. So that should be fun. His brief is due on June the 28th. It may or may not be uploaded, soon or within a few days or whatever, but we're all going to be keeping our eye out for that. And then we just wait for the court's ruling.
Okay, so you feel really good about Ben Chu. That's one of the things that I wanted to ask you based on what you've seen so far. And also, do you have a sense of what Adam Waldman's role is in this? Because he's still very much on the team, even though he was kicked. What's going on with that? Can you explain that to me?
Well, it's so Adam Waldman is Johnny Depp's personal lawyer. And so Johnny Depp, naturally has a ton of legal affairs going on all the time. He's got tons of properties. He's got tons of contracts, production companies. He's got tax concerns. He's got contracts with people that work for him. I mean, there's a ton of things going on. And so it's very likely that what Adam does is he's kind of the coordinator of all that stuff. He's not expected to be an expert in the entertainment contracts and, the insurance that you need for the production company to do the project. He's just, responsible for coordinating the team so that they can get those pieces into place. So that's my feeling of Adam's overall role in the picture. Now, so he had been, formally of record, one of Johnny Depp's attorneys in the Amber Heard litigation and, was removed by the court from that. But the reality is, from my perspective, that Ben Shu has always been the lead. He's been the lead guy on the litigation. Adam Waldman wasn't doing the research, wasn't filing the briefs. That's not his job. That's kind of always been Ben. So I don't know that a whole lot has really changed in how Johnny's team works and, allocates their responsibilities and so forth. But I'm very happy with Ben Shu and his performance. I think he's done a great job. I'm really impressed with his team. In fact, I've been looking at this Brown Rudnick firm because I'm like, these guys seem to have it kind of going on. One of the attorneys in New York, Jessica Meyer. Okay. I am fangirling hard over Jessica Meyer. Okay, she wrote the response on the ACLU briefing that's going on over in New York, and she was basically like the lead attorney in the New York office on that issue. And she's phenomenal. Like she's fantastic. One of the things she did that I just absolutely loved is so it's really common with discovery disputes that the court ends up seeing all the email exchanges, right? Because they need to know, okay, well, what efforts were taken to resolve this issue? How was this issue presented? What are the parties' positions and stuff? And so that's just how it works out that you get the emails filed. Her emails are fucking bomb. Like she was great. There was the one, I forget exactly the wording, but they had sent her, some snarky email like, oh, you've been unable to articulate, your basis for production. And she responds back that, we've explained to you extensively, why it's relevant. And if you need us to do it again, we'll tell you again, we'll be happy to do so. She has a great voice, very professional, but she will fucking cut you off at the knees. And I just love her. So I'm keeping an eye on Jessica Meyer.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. We'll have to check her out now. I hope she sees this. You never know. Okay. Anything else about the JD thing? That was a good update actually on some stuff, or good discussion.
Yeah, I think that's about all that's going on. We just keep waiting for more and more bombshells.
Right. And then the last thing I wanted to ask you about, I know you haven't been keeping up with the Marilyn Manson thing really. It's just not one of your interests, but I wanted to ask you a question. So not knowing much about the case, as you do, but I wonder, how risky is it for someone in Manson's position to sue one or more of these women? He's not sued them so far for defamation of character. And it seems like to me that would be a really good public strategy because it would show that he's fighting this, kind of like Johnny Depp, that he's fighting this, that the charges, the allegations are not true. As a lawyer, what would be the downside, or what would be the danger in doing that, in suing one or more of these women for defamation?
So the downside to it, in my opinion, is basically rests in the weakness of the allegations. And this is something that you've kind of commented on before, about how these are sort of just these vague and conclusory assertions that aren't really saying something specific, like he, hit me in this way and this happened and da da da. It's just this sort of general, he made me uncomfortable. I was cold. I couldn't sleep. He gave me cocaine. And so it's not so much that the factual allegations that they've made are untrue. It's that their conclusion from those facts that they've asserted, that that therefore they were abused by him.
It's like kind of subjective. A number of the allegations are almost.
It does seem very subjective, and so that's kind of the risk, is that their own case may very well fall on just not really having proven that anything illegal took place. And so they, like everyone, are entitled to their opinion.
When you talk about they, I'm sorry, you're talking about the women, the allegations. Yeah.
The accusers, they're entitled to their opinion that Marilyn Manson is terrible and abusive and whatever, and they're even allowed to publish that opinion. And so if Marilyn Manson were to sue them for defamation in California, and the court drew the conclusion that, look, these are just sort of opinion smears. It's First Amendment protected stuff. It's not really an assertion of fact that's damaging. It's just this subjective, like you're saying, thing. Well, then that's First Amendment protected. And California has a very, very protective anti-SLAPP, which is the strategic lawsuit against public participation. This is a law that's been enacted in several states that basically says, look, if we feel like you are suing somebody for exercising their First Amendment rights because you're rich and you want to shut them up, we're going to penalize you for that. So that's really the risk that he has, is that he would be penalized for taking objection to the fact that, they filed this bullshit subjective lawsuit to smear him.
When you say penalized, he would be penalized. What do you mean by that?
Well, usually that means with anti-SLAPP, it's fee shifting. So he can have to pay their lawyers, pay all their legal costs, and ultimately not really end up with any vindication, because his suit's not going to be allowed to go forward. I see. So that's part of the challenge, I think, that he faces. I do think he's in a good position, with the lawsuits, just on the merits. They just aren't strong. There's going to be, factual defenses to things like, hey, maybe you signed a contract to this. That kind of makes it consensual, what happened. There's going to be a lot to flesh out over those details. But by and large, just the allegation, that Marilyn Manson is a creep, or Marilyn Manson, is gross or whatever, those aren't going to be actionable statements.
If now in some of the allegations, there were some specific things that were alleged of like rape, but I guess that in terms of suing for defamation, since it is like a he said, she said, I guess you would have to prove that you didn't rape someone, right? In order for the defamation law.
Yeah, he has to prove the falsity. And so if he's going to pursue defamation, he has to prove that he did not rape them. If he just lets their complaint go forward, they have to prove that he did rape them, Right. So there's a burden shifting that happens when he, proceeds through defamation that way. I
see. Interesting. Okay. Well, not knowing again much of the case, but what if let's say that you were suddenly Marilyn Manson's lawyer, or maybe lawyer and PR person? I don't know. Would you have any advice offhand for someone, whether he's innocent or guilty? I know you don't have a judgment on that necessarily, but what would your advice be? Would you have any in this position?
Honestly, it's so far out of my, purview to try to contemplate the problems of rich, famous, important people. My people are not rich and famous. They're very important, but they're not anybody anyone has heard of, and that's kind of how I like it. So I don't know. The problem is always going to be the trade-offs. There's always going to be trade-offs for whatever he does. If he tries to litigate it in the press, there's definite downsides to that strategy. Does he even have any friends in the press that he can get a sympathetic ear from, or is it just going to invite a pile on? Is it going to put him, is it going to put him in jeopardy? The typical advice a lawyer is always going to give you if you're accused of something is don't say a fucking word about it. Shut up, say nothing, because people can often think that they're, really helping themselves by getting their story out there. And boy, you can put yourself in a jail cell so fast by just opening up your mouth.
Oh, true.
So, my suspicion is that very likely is the advice that he's getting, that yes, you're going to take the PR hit in the short term. You need to think long term. If you wait it out at some point, you'll get through it and you'll have the opportunity to rehabilitate yourself. But for now, given the risks involved, you need to sit and shut up.
And that probably is the advice that he's giving. It's an unfortunate place if someone is falsely accused, as I believe that he has been. But if someone is falsely accused, it's an unfortunate position that they're in, because it seems like there's a lot that the accusers can do, and press and interviews and all, but it seems like the accused is in a pretty vulnerable position. So,
yeah.
Right.
And that gets used against them all the time, if he didn't do it, he would say something like, it's just, no, you have to look out for yourself first in that situation. And that can be one of the hardest things to do, because people's impulse is to defend themselves. And we can all understand that.
Right. For sure. All right. Well, hey, thank you so much for being here and talking about this, especially, last minute and on your vacation or whatever it is that you're doing. You look great. And again, I love that hat. So for anybody interested in skincare, I know I've done a video on skincare. I'm a skincare fanatic. That's a great hat that she's wearing, and she looks great in it. But thanks again. And we'll have you back again for sure. Always one of my most popular guests. So, and for my viewers, again, donations are what allow me to take the time that I take, so much time to put into my videos. So a little support on PayPal, Patreon, and I would really be appreciated. And for sure, if you haven't subscribed, please do that as well. Okay, I've got another great video coming out tomorrow. Thanks again. Have a good day, everybody. Bye.